but then she realizes that he is quite aware of all of that going on, and he simply enjoys it. So it's not even like he wants to have peace in his own home. He, like, relishes in the fact that everybody's...
He simply is a messy bitch. Quack.
Welcome to the Little Duck Book Club with duck number 1.
Ren, and duck number 2.
Anna! Yeah, first episode for us in 2022, and we decided to do...
2023.
Oh, it's 2023. See? I told you I would confuse, like, the years and the numbers. I haven't written 2012 yet anywhere. I'm quite proud of myself.
That would be a throwback. Oh, damn.
Every single year. I don't know what 2012 did to me, but... anyways, we wanted to do...
Your world ended in 2012.
I'm a ghost. I'm not even real. Wouldn't that solve lots of my problems? Well, we decided to do a book discussion again on The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I think we plan on doing all of the books, right?
Yeah, I think we'd like to do the whole trilogy. I think that would be fun.
Yeah.
Especially because I think, personally, quality-wise, they kind of go downhill, so there's more to say about the later ones from a critical perspective. Mm-hmm. And,
Definitely.
like, it's nice to have, like, the whole story and then do, like, a summary on, like, what plot threads went where in the whole trilogy instead of just discussing the first book that sets up a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we did talk about this, I think it was today or yesterday, when I, like, completely messed up the timeline for everything that's happening, and I thought it would be more spread out, and now I'm genuinely wondering, wait, what happens in the other books? So it does go downhill. The pacing especially, I think, takes a bit of a dive, but that's for the other book discussions. Yeah. All right. So, do you want to give, like, a short, like, summary or short... What is this book about for the people who have never heard about The Cruel Prince?
Which... you must live under a rock for not having heard about it at all, but basically it is about our main character, Jude, who is a human girl whose parents were killed by a fae, and then that fae took her and her sisters back with him to Fairyland, and that's where she grew up. And the book basically follows her trying to find her place and getting involved in a bunch of like squabbles with fairy children, but also in actual political intrigues, and a lot of shit goes down like in the later parts of the book. Like, there's a whole coup attempt, and then there's like a whole mess around that failed coup attempt. But yeah, it's a bit crazy, but compared to the other fairy books I've read, which again is not a lot, to be honest, when I look back on it, I like this version of fae or fairies in general the most. Yeah, I think it's very obvious that Holly Black actually cares about fairy lore as it already exists, and that she writes about fairies because she thinks they're interesting, not just because they're like the new stand-in for like elves and just general hot people that get very old. Because she also wrote, like, she's also written other young adult stuff with fairies, but she's also written the Spiderwick Chronicles, which are like children's books, which are also about fairies and stuff, and like you can really tell that she like has love for the fairy stories of, you know, the traditional fairy stories where they're strange and like weird and not just, you know, extremely fuckable or whatever Sarah J. Maas thinks like makes a fairy. Yeah.
I love the, like, you do have some fairies that look more kind of humanoid in the story. Like, you have the whole Greenbrier line and Cardan's friends and stuff. But you also have characters that are actually like involved in the story that do look different and that are not the typical "oh, I'm a pretty boy" kind of fairy. So I do really like that as well. I also love how in these kind of stories, or in her stories, the fairies are actually dangerous in a way that you genuinely feel the struggle that Jude also has with, like, between I want to be part of them and I want to be one of them, and I'm also like very scared of what could happen to me if, for example, she forgets her rowan berry necklace, or if she doesn't use the salt in her food and stuff like that. So that's really enjoyable, because it's not just the actions of the fairies that are dangerous, it's the fairies themselves and like how they live in general. So that's really, I love that.
Definitely. It's just, it's also nice that she sticks with the traditional fairy restrictions. Like the whole thing about fairies not being able to lie is like very integral to most fairy lore, and it's such an interesting plot device to work with, because it like makes it more interesting, because like sure, the fairies are powerful, but also the limitations mean they have to actually be creative with their power. It's not just, oh yeah, I'm just a hundreds of year old's hot guy who is extremely strong and I can use a sword really well, and that's why I'm dangerous. And it's like, well, you're just some guy. It's not, you're not special.
That's like a very, very good point that I really enjoyed when reading the books. So we have Jude, who, as you said, got kidnapped by a guy called Madoc. So basically, Jude's mother, who is a human, or was a human, surprise, she dies in the prologue. She fell in love with Madoc, who is a red cap. Oh, a red cap what? Red cap goblin? No. Just a red cap?
Red caps. Yeah.
Just red caps, yeah. He's like, he has green skin, he's a funky looking guy, and they fall in love. She falls in love with another human in the fairylands. And what we know from book 1 is Madoc thought that Jude's mom like burned down in his house with like the baby in her womb, but instead she actually ran away to the mortal world again, and there she lived with the man she fell in love with, so the human man, and that baby that actually is not dead at all. And then she also gets twin daughters, who are Jude and her other sister Taryn. So the Madoc guy, he comes to the human world to kind of just kill the mom and the dad and kidnap that one daughter, but because of like honor and stuff, he takes the others as well. And I don't know where I wanted to go with this. Yes. The not lying part that you mentioned, it's really interesting how Madoc like handles this, because you have characters like Carden who are very witty, and he says a lot of things as like a little bit of a riddle, and you're constantly thinking, he is telling the truth, but what the hell is this guy actually talking about? And Madoc just chooses to either not talk at all, or just to be very, very like straightforward and just say, no, you suck. So I like that about him.
I mean, the thing about Madoc is that he's one of the most interesting characters in the story, mostly also because his relationship to Jude is one of the most interesting things about these books, I personally think. And, like, even the way he's introduced in the prologue already makes him extremely interesting, because originally he didn't want to kill Jude's mother in terms of he didn't come there to murder her. He came there to take her back with their fairy child. But he is, at his core, a redcap, which are very violent fairies who thrive on bloodshed, basically, and he has an extreme temper, and he didn't, like, he says he, like, the way the story describes it, he's clearly regretful over murdering Jude's mother, but also from what we see in the rest of the story, it could have never gone any other way, because he is just like this. And the fact that he is basically unchangeable in this way is interesting, because it drives his relationships and also ruins them.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is like, it is kind of tragic in a way, because like, even though he cares, it's just in his nature, and he doesn't care enough to temper his nature, which is fascinating, because again, he takes those children of the people he just murdered with him to his home, and they grew up with him as their basically like adoptive father. And it's just, there's this fascinating contradiction, because the story is written from Jude's point of view exclusively, but we know that like she is terrified of him because he is extremely violent, and her introduction to him was him murdering their mother in cold blood. But also, he raised them, and he also played with them, and he gives them gifts, and he's kind to them, and he tells them he loves them, because he does, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
And like, she knows that his love is like, even though he does love them, it's no protection against what he would do to them, because ultimately it doesn't mean as much to him as other things he wants.
There's a quote at like quite the beginning of the book by Jude that says, "I came to love him. I do love him. It's just not a comfortable kind of love." So that like describes this, like what you said, how Jude is kind of feeling conflicted, but especially the thing that Madoc's like love in quotation marks is a kind of a difficult thing to understand from a human perspective of love, gets mentioned so many times in the books. It's like, oh, well, I mean, he does love us. Well, he also loved our mother, but now she's dead because he killed her. And then sometimes later it's like, oh, but I mean, he does love us, and he does love Oak, so he won't like do something in the direction of that kid. But then again, he loved my mom, and now she's dead. So that's so interesting to me with Madoc.
The thing about Madoc is also that like, his number one solution to problems is generally violence.
Yeah.
And, like, the thing is that the violence is both directed inward and outward toward people, because, like, his love for his children that he took in is, like, real, and if anybody harmed them, the threat of violence also is there, but this doesn't actually make Jude or Taryn feel safe, because they know that the threat of violence is just as directed towards them as towards the people who might hurt them.
Yeah. He says... please go ahead.
There's this interesting scene after Jude... generally, Jude and Taryn get bullied by the other fairy kids because they're human and fairies are assholes. And, like, after one particularly extreme bout of abuse by their peers, it describes how Jude comes home and Madoc is raging against and threatening the people who hurt her, but it is way scarier for her because the threat of violence, even though rationally she knows it's directed outward, it's like this violence under the surface is always there, and like it doesn't help that at this moment it's not about hurting her, but it might as well at some other time. Yeah,
definitely. There's this like one quote. I annotated this book to the heavens just for the people to know, okay? I actually took this serious this time.
You put like, I don't know, 300 post-it notes in there.
So many. I marked everything that I thought might be useful. So Madoc is the High King's general. So there's a High King who rules over most of the courts in the Fairylands. There's some courts who don't like abide to that High King, but most of them do. And he's the general, and the main plot in the beginning of the book is that the High King is going to abdicate and he's gonna put one of his, I think it's 7 children on the throne. And Madoc is quite happy about that because he's a general, as you said, he's a red cap, he's ready for war. He says, what good is a general without no war? So he's excited for this. And when Jude mentions that, is there gonna be some kind of squabble between the children? He said, who gets the throne? He says, change is coming and there's no wisdom in crossing me. And it just basically describes this dude. He's like, I mean, you can do something against me, but I will stab a bitch if they try to fight me. And that just, with no regard to what the outcome of that is. Because as you said, he can't, help himself in that kind of way. He gets very, agitated and just, kills somebody. And that happens from time to time. So I just really like Madoc. This is the Madoc fan club here.
No, Madoc is, I think, my favorite character after Jude because obviously I love her. She is wonderfully terrible and so obviously traumatized. It's fascinating.
It's insert this. It's traumatized.
She is so angry all the time, and it's lovely. I love her. I love how willing she is to commit violence against anyone. It is amazing. It's especially fun because a lot of especially YA protagonists are often more normal, I guess. They're not even boring particularly, they don't have to be, but a lot of them are meant to be more relatable and are therefore often just kind of normal people who then get dragged into something and then have to deal with that. But Jude's already been dragged years ago, and now that we actually see the most of the story from her perspective, she is already changed by this and traumatized, and she is so angry and so scared all the time because, she's living in the house of the man who killed her parents. And the only reason other fairies don't kill her or maim her is because she has his protection for the time being. So she's basically never really safe.
It is because of Madoc, yeah. There's this interesting conflict between her, being afraid of living in that house and being scared for her life, and at the same time also not really fitting in with the mortal world anymore. The older daughter, who is actually the biological child of Madoc, her name is Vivian, but I think it's usually just abbreviated to Vivi. She goes into the mortal world a lot of times. She has a girlfriend there, and she's this whole Rage Against the Machine teenager because she can talk back to Madoc because he's obviously more less inclined to hurt his biological daughter than those two mortal twins he has there. And you have this struggle with Jude of, am I gonna align more with my sister and I'm gonna go more into the mortal world and maybe leave all this fairy stuff behind, or because I'm scared to live here, or do I want to become one of those fairies? Do I want to become a knight at the court? Do I want to be at the same level as the other fairies? So that's also one of those interesting aspects with their relationship. She's constantly torn between, do I want Madoc to be proud of me? Or am I too scared and too angry at him to just not want him to feel anything positive towards me? It's this constant tug of war between them. And it's so interesting as well. Because at one time in the book, Jude does mention that in the beginning she thought Madoc was kind of indifferent or unaware of the squabbles going on between Vivi and Taryn and all of the children and all of the tensions in the house. But then she realizes that he is quite aware of all of that going on, and he simply enjoys it. So it's not even he wants to have peace in his own home. He relishes in the fact that everybody's...
He simply is a messy bitch.
I wrote this down somewhere.
I see that barely suppressed conflict doesn't bother him in the least. He likes it just as well as open war. So it's not even that Madoc wants to solve this problem. He loves this problem that Jude has, and that Jude has with Vivi and like all the other occupants of the house.
Yeah,
so that adds to the violence of this character.
The fascinating thing is also, I mean, we don't really know that much about Taryn. She is Jude's twin, and she is, especially in the beginning, they're in a lot of scenes together, but Taryn is, well, Jude's adaptation to living in this traumatizing situation was basically to seek power to build her own safety, because she perceives that the only way to ever be safe is to have power herself. And Taryn's adaptation was basically to fit in so that she'd be safe in the crowd and have other people protect her because they see her as like them. So Taryn is relatively like... Well, she doesn't draw that much attention to herself, partly on purpose and partly because like Jude's just more openly insane, so obviously she's you pay more attention to her in a situation. But yeah, we don't know that much about her. But we know for Jude that because they were very young when Madoc murdered their parents, they were like 7, I think. She barely, like, most of her memories of her, like, childhood from before are not very, like, clear or accurate anymore. And a lot of who she is because of what Madoc has taught her. Like, she is, like, you can really tell that a lot of the violence and the way she approaches problems is a result of what he has taught her, because she's also talked about how Madoc tutored them in like war and strategy and sword fighting, and like it's so interesting because clearly Madoc is some sort of character foil for Jude, because like over the book she is like changing and evolving and like figuring out her relationship to when she wants to employ violence and when it's better to like make peace or make a deal. And Madoc can never do that. He will always have to choose like the direct way. He will always fight, and he will never bend to what somebody else wants.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting. And it also leads to a lot of tension because Jude has very strong ideas about what she wants, and when that starts to conflict with Madoc's ideas, then that's the point where it gets really interesting.
I think it's also really interesting because she is, of course, impacted by his way of just going with head through the wall. And for her, that simply does not work in the Fairylands. Because she's not like a gigantic red cap who can just swing his sword and decapitate people. So she does need to adapt at some point. And there's like this disconnect between what she sees as, oh, this works, and what she wants to work and what actually works for her. So that's also quite interesting.
Yeah.
Because her sister, Taryn, she's more of the, as you said, more of a softer version than Jude. And I don't remember how it goes in the later books, but there's definitely a little bit of like, I feel like internalized misogyny in her regard to Taryn, because while Jude is very protective of Taryn, especially in the beginning of the book, and she's like, oh well, Taryn decides to, instead fall in love with some fairy dude and then become like a member of the society this kind of way, there's also a lot of times this kind of like disregard for that idea of what Taryn wants to do in her life. So it's even more like prominent that this softer way seems to work far better than the very aggressive approach that Jude kind of wants to go for. And I feel like that's also kind of enraging for Jude, because she's like, but I can't behave like Taryn, because I am not Taryn, and I want to do it differently than she does. Completely, disregarding the fact that Terran's way also is not the most safest way to get around in fairyland.
Spoilers, Terran's way ends up being also pretty bad for her.
Yeah.
I mean, Jude's way kind of works sometimes, but obviously her life gets worse because at the end of the first book and then in the second and third, she is so deeply involved in extremely important politics that her life can only be dangerous because she becomes the seneschal for the king, so basically like the advisor for the king, which not exactly a safe position for anyone, but especially not someone as antagonistic as Jude or as someone as like fragile as a human being who already has a bunch of people who don't like her.
Yeah, that's completely true. One thing that I think is interesting, so we have this like very direct approach for Jude, and again, it doesn't really work for her that way, and then she gets approached by he's the second child of the High King, and he's not the first in line for the throne, but he is rumored to be the one who gets crowned High King. She gets approached by, how do we pronounce him? Dane,
I think, yeah.
Dane. She gets approached by Dane, who's very interested in the fact that since she's a human, she can lie. And instead of letting her become like a knight and be like this full figure of glory and everybody will respect her just when they see her, he suggests for her to become a spy. So that kind of takes her aggression and puts it in a different way, in a different kind of class. You were talking about like a fantasy RPG, and I thought that was really interesting and was kind of her own thing. All the other things, she looked at other people and tried to mimic them, and this was her own way of fitting in, and it fits in so perfectly, I think, because this is a role that allows her to also fuck up without a lot of people noticing. You know, if she sneaks around and fucks up, it's like, oh, well, something happened, but we don't know that it was Jude, opposed to if she was to openly kill someone. And everybody would know it was her.
Yeah, it's I think it's pretty obvious that she wanted to become a knight because basically that's what Madoc taught her. The things she learned from him are things that are basically only suited to knighthood. So she also took on, like, I think, not like purposefully, but like his ideas of like what's honorable and what's right. And she even says it when Dane approaches her to be a spy. She's kind of disappointed because that's not what she thought she wanted. But then when she actually is a spy, she finds that the role actually suits her pretty well.
And she likes it, she said at some point.
Yeah, that's unsurprising because it makes use of both her strength and her weaknesses. So that's pretty good for her. And it's also basically the first time she steps out of Madoc's shadow, because this is right after he denied her. Basically, she wanted to apply to be like considered as a knight, and Madoc said, no, we'll discuss this again after the coronation. And he said that because he didn't want her to be a sworn knight to one of the other children of the king, because he's involved in planning a coup to put somebody else on the throne. So he said no because he didn't want her to be in danger. But she perceived it as, you are not good enough. So then she was very willing to jump onto the thing that, even though it wasn't what she thought she wanted, it was at least something.
Yeah, it was some way to strengthen her place in the court.
Yeah, so she wanted power because power means safety from her perception. And if Madoc wasn't willing to let her try, then she was gonna take whatever else she could get.
So we
did talk about like things we liked and like kind of just jumped into it. But when we talked about like at the very beginning of our book discussions of what we want to look out for when we read books, we had one part that was like plot holes or pet peeves. Is there anything in the book that for you said, like, come on?
There are things that I personally think are annoying. This is, like, obviously I will be in the minority with this. I think the romance subplot is pretty annoying. I don't care for it.
The one with Locke?
The one with Carden. I don't think it's necessary for them to make out, like, in the book. Like, I'm not opposed to them having a romance subplot, but the way it's written is, like, annoying to me, because I think it takes away from them actually sorting out their differences and just being like, oh, we're attracted to each other, so that gives us common ground to some degree, which is just, I feel like it's cheap and kind of annoying, because we could have something better. I also felt like in the middle of the book, after Jude becomes a spy, there's a good amount of pages devoted to her starting to build up an immunity to poisons. So she slowly poisons herself in slow doses to build up an immunity. And it's mentioned quite a bit, but the payoff to it is extremely disappointing. Like, the payoff is so stupid, and the worst thing is, because we've already read the other ones, I know that it doesn't get any better. It's so stupid. So there's so much time devoted to it, and the payoff is basically just at the very end. She poisons Madoc and herself at the same time. So like, she can make use of her immunity to it, but the way it's done is just stupid, because if she already knew she was planning to drink the poison, she could have just had an antidote with her, or could have taken the antidote beforehand, because basically she offers Madoc 2 glasses of wine, one is red, one is white, and like... He chooses the red one because obviously he does, but like the twist they were both poisoned, but this is stupid. Yeah. Like, at this point she could have just, like, even the whole, oh, I'm immune to this poison would have made more sense if she had given them both the exact same wine, and he would have seen her pour both of them the same wine, so he would immediately think, oh, one of them... There was no reason to assume anything would be wrong with either of them, because I saw her pour both of them first. So that whole plot was so stupid and annoying, and
I mean, there is the mention, I think a couple pages after the whole poisoning thing happens, that one of the things that made Jude like feel like really bad, or like on the other way around, it didn't make her feel accomplished, that she managed to trick or like win against Madoc, because he genuinely under no circumstance thought that she was cross him. So this whole thing, oh, she might have poisoned my wine, that didn't even cross his mind.
That was
so that's like one of the things where you could say, yeah, maybe, but the whole they call it Mithridatism in the book. Dane mentions it to her. It feels too conveniently placed to have, as you said, such a small stake for it in the end.
It's such an obvious Chekhov's gun, but the fire that comes out of it is just like a poof. So disappointing. Yeah, it's like, why did you set this up? I don't know if I've said this before, but there's so much that happens in this book. There are so many plots going on, like subplots that are weaved together. There's something happening constantly. This feels like a waste of time.
Of a plotline.
And like, it would have been fine if there was proper payoff for it in a later book, because I think it's normal that a first book has a lot of setup, even if it doesn't come to fruition in like a satisfying way in the first book. It might in the second or in the third, but I already know it doesn't, so this has no point, and it's stupid. Something that I also thought was really stupid was actually, like, the Court of Shadows, which is Dane's spy network. It's just 3 people. There's just 3 people there. What the fuck?
It's the Court of Shadows.
He is favored to take the throne. He's the second prince. He's extremely powerful in the court. He has 3 spies. Are you shitting me?
He has,
what the fuck?
The whole executive of the borough, so the place where the family lives.
So
he has
stupid.
that under his control. He is in his father's stead. He's wielding armies. And he has 3 spies.
So dumb.
Like,
I know it was so that we just have 3 quirky guys who interact with Jude, but, like, come on. There should have just been traces that there's obviously more people coming in and out of there.
Yeah.
And there should have also, like, and they should also not know, like, who the other spies are for those. Like, the spy network seems so rushed and, like, nonsensical for a spy network. It's like, it's just 3 guys. What the fuck?
It's a bit weird because if I remember correctly, in the later books, they get into trouble because, like, 1 or 2 of them are incapacitated.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so we only have 1 person who knows how to bomb stuff, and we only have 1 person who knows how to, like, shoot a bow. It's like
insane.
that's a miscalculation. Okay, that's not a good project management on their part. They should have hired more people. Like, talk to HR, more spies.
I get it. The population in Fairyland is, like, lower than in a metropolitan area, but come on,
have a Craigslist for, like,
literally this is, like, a Fairyland, and we already, like, why aren't there, like, more weirdo creatures that are also, like, obviously working for Dane, but that Jude doesn't get introduced to because there should just be traces of more spies, even if she doesn't meet them, because of course you don't want all your spies to know all your other spies, because that's dangerous from an information management perspective. But come on, more than 3 people. Guys, you can afford more of them.
Especially if most of them are very easily swayed by money, and they're like, well, I don't have any obligation to loyalty, so I'm just gonna go to the person who pays the most. Like, you want more than 3 people. Like, 2 things that I was, like, a little bit bothered by, but then again, okay, so the first one is, okay, so, like, a little bit of lore. So Madoc's wife is called Oriana. Lore. Madoc's wife is called Oriana. She's a beautiful blue, pastel blue fairy, and her son called Oak. And all of these 3, Oak, Oriana, and Madoc, look nothing alike. Madoc and Oriana not looking nothing alike, like, that's normal, okay, they're just married. But you would assume that their son looks something like them, especially because Madoc's daughter, Vivi, has his eyes. Yeah. And, like, there's similarities between them. So we have Madoc, who's green, Oriana is blue, and then we have the son, Oak, who is, like, fair-skinned, he has golden hair, he has tiny little horns on his head, and he has little hoofs as, like, feet, as legs. And you wonder, okay, that's quite a specific, like, description, but I'm gonna run with it. Until you meet the royal family, and one of the people of the royal family, Dane, is, surprise, golden-haired, fair skin, has 2 little horns, and, like, goat feet.
He has deer legs.
Deer legs. Something with hooves. And it's like, the considering the fact that they can't lie, at some point in, like, the lives of these people, one of them must have, like, wondered that nothing adds up in terms of the visuals. And there is even the discussion that Jude said it was a bit weird how fast they suddenly had a son after they got married, after Madoc and Oriana got married. So that was one of the, it's not necessarily a plot hole, but something that I thought was kind of weird, that nobody at any point questioned why the general has a child that looks exactly like his boss. But, like, Yeah, I don't know. That's something that I thought it was a bit weird.
I also think that's surprising, but on the other hand, I think Oak's pretty young. He is pretty sickly. He doesn't actually interact with many people. Like, he's kept home a lot. And he doesn't go to a lot of, like, official functions. So, I feel like most people probably assume that Oak isn't Madoc's child, per se. Like, but they might not jump to the idea that he'd be a royal child just because they'd assume someone would have claimed him. Because royal children are very rare. Because fairies just don't have a lot of children because they live so long. I feel like everyone's just like, well, somebody would have said something, right? Like, at this point, everyone's just like, well, wouldn't anyone say something?
But exactly, that's the thing. They're so rare, and there's like this whole thing about one of the consorts of the king. She was pregnant. She got poisoned. Like, at no point did anybody consider that that child actually survived, and might like still be alive. And if it was just any random forest fairy, I'd understand. But Madoc is the general of Dane. Like, they do take Oak to the coronation. They take them to the revels and any kind of festivities in the borough. So he does leave the house. He has been seen by people.
Yeah, I honestly, I think the Oak plot is already kind of it's not bad per se. It is, however, mismanaged, I feel like, from a writing perspective, because I remember the very first time I read Cruel Prince, the information just, it felt like it came out of nowhere. Because there are parts, like, where Jude puts, like, information together, and they feel very sudden and very quick, and then we immediately jump to other plot points and forget about that part again.
Yeah.
It feels very random when you first read about it, and you're like, okay, there was, like, because the Oak's actual mother, who was poisoned, is also the mother of a different character who is in classes with Taryn and Jude, and then has like a romantic subplot as well. So the way it's presented is kind of confusing. The way Jude like thinks through the information is, on the one hand, confusing to read, but also she makes connections that feel arbitrary when you read it, because it's like, sure, she's read about like one particular poison during her spying, and then she's like, oh, this woman was poisoned with this, and it's like, okay, but like maybe other people also were. Like, you can't just, you know what I mean? Like, Holly Black knew what twists she wanted at the end to make the coronation of Carden possible, but the way it was written was very jarring. It feels very random when it first appears in the story, and I don't, like, there's a lot of hints that Oak is obviously related to the High King and Dane, but, like, you don't, like, they're like fun Easter eggs when you read it the second time, because again, there is so much fucking important plot shit happening at all times that these hints are not things you would pay attention to. At least I didn't the first time I read it, and even rereading it now, I was like, this is still one of my least favorite plots in the way it's done.
I when I read it for the first time, I actually got hung up on this fact already, because I was confused about the colors of people. Like, okay, that person is green, that person is blue. People are not just like colors of like brown and beige, but they're actually like, we're using the whole rainbow. And then I thought, why is this one like just white? Why has he horns, and why does he look like the other person? So it was something that confused me the first time I read it, because I was genuinely confused.
That's so funny, because I wasn't paying that much attention to the descriptions. I was like, oh yeah, cool, this guy has horns and deer feet, whatever. It wasn't that relevant to me. I was like, okay.
Yeah, and that's why for the first time it really confused me. And now, as you said, with the Easter eggs, reading it the second time, it was like she's like hitting you with a stick, and she's like, these are the pieces of information, and it feels weird that Jude has kind of such a long buffering time until she gets to the point where she's like, oh, maybe there is something going on.
I think the thing that bothers me is like the stuff with the acorns and like the note, because I think that kind of information is like presented in not exactly the greatest way, because like all the like the way they look similar and stuff, that's actually like effective hints, but like the other hints with like the songbird in the acorn and stuff, it's like, this is very vague and could mean anything. And when Jude was like putting these these pieces together that were found in extremely different circumstances that she had no real reason to put together, really, it was just like, what? Why are we putting this together? Because she didn't approach us from the perspective of, wait, Oak looks like Dane. She approached it from, wait, Liriope was poisoned with this particular poison, and I've read a note about this poison in this other guy's house, and
Cusco's poison.
It seemed like it was like important information, and it's like, why are we even doing this?
Yeah. it would have been far more interesting, or like, I think it could have been set up in a better way if instead of, so the way she finds this acorn is only because of this weird, like, super small romantic subplot she has with Locke. So the son of the murdered woman who is the actual mother of Oak. She has like a little romance thing with him. She gets invited to his house. She wears his mother's dresses, and that's the way how she finds his acorn, and it's like weirdly set up. I think it would have been more like genuine to Jude's character if she had found this spying as well. And then she's like, oh, we got clue number 1, something with these weird mushrooms, and we got clue number 2. And if she had then gone to Oriana, and instead of saying, I know what the deal is, she could have been like, okay, I'm just gonna bullshit, and like, maybe I'm gonna get some information out of it. And Oriana thinks, oh shit, this little child figured out the conspiracy, and she's like, oh,
I think that was easier the way it's unraveled is like the wrong way around, because it would make way more sense for Jude to like learn from Oriana that she used to be one of the king's consorts, and that she like knows the murdered woman, and then Jude would be like, okay, Oriana knows this woman who was pregnant was murdered, and then also have the same moment where Oriana sees Jude with Dane in their house. Yeah. And then Oriana letting something slip about, like, Dane being dangerous or whatever. And, like, Jude putting it together from this, I don't know why we have to involve Locke or this random acorn, quite frankly. I think the acorn is just confusing. It does not help much. I think it would make more sense if, like, she found something, like, or saw in Oriana's rooms that she had an item that obviously belonged to a set from Locke's estate, from his mother's rooms. Like, this would be more organic, I feel like, because the way the way Jude unravels this secret feels so strange to me.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely does. I have to be honest, I do actually like the subplot with Oak, because when I read it for the first time, since a lot of things in the book are set up as kind of
predictable, I feel. Like a lot of things, you get tons of little hints everywhere. It's like, this is gonna happen. And so for me, it actually was a surprise that in the end, the whole plan being set up that, oh, you know, Cardan is gonna crown Oak, and then Oak's gonna be the new king, blah blah. And then in the very last moment, Oak being like, oh well, Cardan, you're now the High King.
That part was really fun.
I really liked it, because when I read the book for the first time, I thought, how does Jude think it's going to work to crown a child and then just whisk it away to the mortal world?
Yeah.
The king of the fairy world.
Yeah.
I thought, this is never gonna happen. Like, how does she think that this is gonna work? And then when she actually crowns Cardan, I was like, I can see this actually working. And that
I do.
Also was so fun with the whole geese that she puts on him, like the enchantment.
The promise.
Yeah.
I think that part is really good. And it's a good twist, especially because just like a few scenes before, like Jude and Cardan have built a very tentative sort of trust. And she promises Cardan that he can leave after they're done here. Yeah. And like, she already knows she's lying. And then, like, this is such a betrayal of this, like, tentative fledgling trust that they've built. And it's very fun.
And she's like, the instant she got that trust, she's like, I'm gonna stab you in the back.
Yeah, it's like, well, you trusted me. Seems like a you problem.
Yeah. That also sets up the second book quite nicely, because you think, okay, how's the story gonna play out? But with this little twist in the end, you're like, oh, getting juicy.
This is getting really interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't dislike like the idea of the Oak subplot, but I think the way it's executed was just not great. I don't know, it felt like it didn't fit into the rest of the flow of the narrative because it was unraveled from like the wrong direction. Because Jude didn't unravel it from like going off the people she knows best and then connecting it to other people she didn't know about. She starts with a woman who got murdered she barely knows and connects that to a note about the same poison and being like, well, clearly these must be connected for reasons. No one else has ever been poisoned with this same poison.
And it's also like it gets thrown in like somewhere in the middle of the book that this even happened. So it feels like if this was something that was mentioned like at the very beginning, we weren't talking about, oh, her mother tried to like trick Madoc into thinking she was dead. Kind of connecting those two things, because it's like, well, other pregnant fairies have died. Other pregnant fairies have been like the points of attack for others in the political scheme. That would have made perfect sense. Yeah, and you would have had this thing already set up, and then
also
later the gears start turning.
Whole the whole foreshadowing of like presumably dead children not actually being dead. Yeah. Because the thing about it is that like this gets sprung on us in the middle of the book, while other things are foreshadowed at the very beginning. Most things are already like either like as a bit of irony or like generally foreshadowed right at the beginning. I remember like very, very, very early in the book, they're having like a family dinner, and Vivi makes a comment about how Madoc is gonna, I think, plans to kill someone or something in regards to the royal family, and he gets mad about it. And Jude just assumes that, like, oh, Vivi's just trying to make him mad. But knowing what happens later, you're like, oh, Vivi knew something.
Yeah.
Or she suspected something. And, like, he wasn't mad because he felt insulted. He was mad because this was too true and he didn't want other people to hear about it. So basically, everything gets set up very early on. Jude also is like, oh God, can you imagine if Cardan were king? That would be terrible. is also very, very early on. And then, bam, the dramatic irony.
I'm trying to find that part in the book. Because here, Taran asks, why is he abdicating? Vivi's smirk has turned nasty. His children got impatient with him for remaining alive. A wash of rage passes over Madoc's face.
Yeah.
I really like this whole dinner party thing that they have going on. It's also where the quote comes from with the "there's no use in crossing me."
Yeah.
It's where Madoc tells Jude that she's not fit to be a knight because she's not like a killer, and she takes this very personal. She's like, he has no idea who I am.
But also,
so there's a lot of setup already in that one dinner party.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I think one thing that is a reason why I enjoy most of what I've read of Holly Black, even if like the books aren't perfect, obviously, is that she is very good at packing a lot of information into short scenes. Like, she's a very effective storyteller, even if what stories she tells isn't always like super great, but like, yeah, she's clearly good at this, and she's clearly thought about it, and you can really see it with how much happens in this book, and that still most information is still communicated effectively. Like, we learn so much from like just the prologue already has so much like packed into small sentences. Like, right, very at the beginning of the prologue, there is a quote where the children are sitting in front of the TV, and Judah's like, everything was boring, everything was fine. Yes. And it's such a it's so good, because for the rest of the book, it comes up again and again as a theme that fairy is exciting, but also dangerous and terrifying, and nothing is fine. And it's also like so interesting. Yeah.
It's also the first chapter, so directly after the prologue, when she says, "Oh, everything was boring, everything was fine." She described like how her sisters are sitting in front of the television, they're eating like fish sticks and stuff. Yeah. And the first chapter is just one sentence. It is, "In fairy, there are no fish sticks, no ketchup, and no television." Yeah. And that sets it up so nicely as well.
Yeah, it's just
delicious. It's so delicious.
That's the thing. Like this, like, I wouldn't say it's like necessarily a super great book, but there are so many compelling parts about it that it's just interesting to talk about. Yeah. Because before we've talked a lot about books that are just genuinely shit, which leave a lot to just like complain about, because they suck at literally everything they're trying to do. But like, this book is like very compelling because it actually like deals with its themes in interesting ways, but also Holly Black just also scratches the surface on so many interesting things which don't get explored because they're not directly relevant to the plot, but they're there, and they add so much flavor and interesting texture to the story that it's just, there's so much to say.
It's so good.
It is genuinely good, and I also understand why some people might not enjoy it, but also I feel like some people are very harsh in their critiques, sometimes unfairly so. Especially, I mean, obviously, as a Jude stan, I would say this, but I feel like some people just misread Jude just purposefully. Because Jude is very honest as a character about what she, like, the way she thinks and acts. Like, her inner monologue is, like, pretty clear about her goals, her feelings, her intentions.
Everything.
And I feel like, sure, you can, like, say she's kind of an idiot, but, like, she's aware. Like, she spends, like, the second half of the book being like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just trying to get through the day and not die, and also not ruin the fucking world for every living human by putting someone on the throne who is the absolute worst guy you can imagine. like, she has no idea what she's doing.
She doesn't have any idea.
And that's fine. The narrative doesn't act like she's some kind of mastermind. She herself is like, well, I have a plan, but it's kind of a long shot, and maybe it'll work. Let's hope for the best.
There's one more thing that bothered me. So Jude and like Carden and all his friends, they're like called the children of the gentry.
Yeah.
Gentry. And they're like held as something that is kind of important, which is even more infuriating that Jude and Taryn are included into that group. And there's one of Carden's friends, he's called Valerian. He's like the dick. He's a jock. He dresses completely in red and thinks he's the greatest person alive.
Yeah.
And he antagonizes Jude throughout the whole book until at some point he climbs into her window at night and tries to kill her. And out of self-defense, she kills him back. She kills him. And after that, it's like nobody cares about it anymore. There's one very small part where Jude is has kidnapped Carden, and she asks him, didn't you ever wonder where your friend went? He was like, oh yeah, actually I did wonder about that. She's like, well, yeah. I killed him. And considering how important these children are, because fairies don't get a lot of children, because they're from the gentry, I thought it was so weird that she gets away
the thing
with
is
killing
also
him,
that
and nobody is like, where did that child go?
Like right before Jude kills him in self-defense, we have a scene where Dane comes to her house to rebuke her for stabbing Valerian, because it's a fucking bad thing to do, because it just garners attention that he doesn't want. And it's just a faux pas. You don't just stab children of the gentry. You just don't. But then, after he's dead, it's just not relevant anymore. And, like, in fairness, like, a day after that or something is, like, the coronation, which is a big event, and then that ends in a bloodbath. So, fair enough, a lot of people are like, Valerian, I wasn't even thinking about him. But it is a little weird that it doesn't come up more. But I feel like if this book just had more room to breathe, we could have more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But yeah, that is very funny. That it's just like, he's dead, it's fine. No one cares.
Because, I mean, it is true, like, a bigger part, for the most of it, the royal family gets murdered during the coronation. But it's also described that all of the fairies are like, meh, and most of them go back to partying, like 30 minutes later. So while, yes, there was a huge bloodbath, they still go, look, like they're kind of like, okay, we're postponing this meeting until the High King is finally crowned.
Yeah, it is
so it does
very
feel a bit
odd
weird
that it doesn't come up more.
Yeah, definitely. Because I would expect at least Carden or Nicasia or some of Valerian's friends to be like, where is he? What happened?
Yeah, I think another thing that I personally thought was kind of pointless, I guess, was the part where Jude tries to save that girl from Baelkin's estate. I understand from a thematic perspective why you would want this kind of scene in there, why it's relevant to Jude's character, but this book already has so much going on and so much more like important shit happening that like the 2 chapters or whatever this takes up, like it takes up a good amount of page time.
Yeah.
It's just like, this is the one subplot where I'm like, we didn't need this. Like, for everything else is so interconnected that I'm like, okay, I can understand why you do need this for the compelling story beats you want later, and I understand why we can't cut this, because it is somewhat important. But this part, I'm like, I feel like you can take this out and not lose much at all.
Yeah, I agree.
This felt very... like, I understand it because, one, it tells us something about, like, Jude as a person, and it's also, like... basically, it scratches on the themes of, like, saving people and trying to fix people if they don't want fixing and whatever. But it's like, yeah, we didn't need it.
Definitely. That's one of those plots that could have been scrapped.
One thing that also I thought was annoying is, I understand that this also probably is something that a lot of other people don't care that much about, was the cameos from other characters from other Holly Black books. And I've read them, but the first time I read Cruel Prince, I hadn't read them, and it has already bothered me then. It was very obvious that these were characters that Holly Black assumed the audience to be somewhat familiar with, and that we were supposed to already have opinions on, and they got way too much attention for, again, this book has so much happening. We did not need this. We could have used these pages to explore more of the other things that were already happening.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessary at all, because the justification is that Jude has to go around and like find support for Cardan from other monarchs who would swear to the crown. But the crown is already the conduit for the fealty of everyone in Fairy who's already sworn to the High King. The moment the crown is on Cardan's head, it doesn't matter if they want him as the king. He will be king, and they will have to serve him, because that is the magic imbued in the crown. They have already sworn to it, and they can't take it back. So this was super unnecessary. This was like 30, 40 pages that we did not need to spend with this.
Yeah, I think she does go to the courts who aren't sworn yet. Like to the termites.
Yeah, she goes to Reuben and Severin. But again, it's like, I understand, like, at least in part, the thing with Reuben is like as a setup for the next book, because there something happens. But also, this could have happened at the beginning of the second book after Cardan was already crowned.
Definitely.
This did not need to happen here, where again, so much was already going on.
I feel like next to the that chapter where she goes around and rallies forces, does take up a little bit of space. Not as much as the whole Sophie thing, but definitely still a lot. I feel like since she is so good at putting lots of information in very small parts, just keeping up with all of these characters is already a lot on the reader. The scene where the first coronation is supposed to take place, and she's like, oh, there's that person from that court and that person from that court, and then it's like, oh, there's like this guy who's Lord Reuben, and then there's like this blue pixie next to him, and then there's this other guy, and then there's this human with red hair. Is it a slave? Is it a lover? What is it? It's like, don't give me all of this kind of information. Yeah, it's like, I know it's like an Easter egg.
Yeah, it's like,
it's too many eggs.
It's too much. Yeah, it really. This is why I hate this kind of like cameo crossover shit. It's like, I don't mind all your books being set in the same universe, but the thing is that it takes weird detours like that. It takes away attention from the things that are really important, and just it doesn't add anything to the story. You know. Like,
yeah,
we have like several moments in the book where people talk about, like, ooh, Lord Reuben is so important and dangerous. Oh, and I heard he killed his lover to get his throne. And it's like, yeah, I've read this story. I know what happens in it. But, like, we didn't need this in this story. He has a whole book he has whole 2 books about him. We don't need more of it.
Which are the books about him? I have one book that you gave me from her.
Yeah, Tithe, and the third one in that series, because there's Tithe, then there's the second is like Valor or whatever, and then there's the third one, I forgot its name, but the second one is about a different character, but also plays in the same area, and like the first and the third are about Reuben and what's her name? It's something with a K. Kaylee? Casey? Something like that. But again, it's like, yeah, sure. I know this story, but like, I don't care to see it here because I already read it somewhere else. Like, you can just mention him and say like, oh, there's this guy. He looks scary. That's like, from that point, you don't need to describe like the girl he's with. You don't need to give me a scene where they're eating takeout and being domestic. I don't need to see this.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I don't need this. You could have just had like a short paragraph describing that you had a conversation with Robin where he seemed favorable but was unwilling to promise you anything. That would have been enough.
Yeah. You can still put the little like Chinese takeout part in there as like a and maybe there's like a little bit more of multi-dimensionality about this evil guy because I saw him eating takeout, and that's something that I kind of miss from my human world.
Yeah.
Easy.
But like, we didn't need a whole scene that where it's like, oh, actually he's a much softer boy than you thought because he has a girlfriend who's also cute with him, and it's like, we don't need to know this.
It feels like a inside joke that's going on too long.
Yeah, it really is like I don't know, it bothers me almost more now that I know, like now that I've read the other stories, because I'm just like, we didn't need this. Anybody who's read them would recognize them just from the name drops or just from a very short description. We didn't need this whole scene. And when I read it first and didn't know them, I was also like, why are we spending time on those rendos? We have important things to do. Hello?
Especially, like, it's not Cassandra Clare level yet, where she dedicates like a third of a book to a new series, but it is disruptive enough.
It really is kind of annoying. I mean, I am already like a crossover hater, so it's it's I'm always not entirely sure if this is just my personal dislike for it, because I like when characters stay in their story boxes where they belong, but sometimes it's just so annoying.
I mean, as somebody who like read lots of DC and Marvel comics and that are stories that are like feeding off the fact that there's lots of crossovers, I personally really like them if they're done well. Like if it's natural for these characters to feed off each other and to interact with each other. Crossovers are one of my favorite things. I feel like in books it's more difficult to have crossovers that work well, because you, like, for example, in comics you have very short issues that kind of, one issue gets, for example, posted for Superman, and then for Superboy, and then there's one for Batman and Robin. Like, these all interconnect in some sort of way. But in books, as you said, you have a trilogy that 2 books are about one character, then you have another trilogy and you're trying to mesh those together. That's very difficult.
And the thing is also that, like, I think this is, like, I feel like there are media where this makes more sense. Like, I think for superheroes, for example, it does make a lot of sense, especially for superheroes who are not, like, I don't know, there's, like, superheroes were already conceptualized as kind of, like, overlapping and, like, they have so much in common. But for a lot of books especially,
they don't.
There is... I don't know how to describe this. So, in a book, it's just... Most books have a very clear protagonist, and it is also very typical of narratives and expected and normal that the world bends around these protagonists. Both the protagonists and villains or whatever you have. And if you start then putting these people who the world has just bent around together, it doesn't work. Because it feels off.
There's
it's
like
also why I personally
that the world
don't like the whole... I'm not interested in it, in like the new Shadow and Bone series, because I think it's very obvious that these 2 stories, like Six of Crows and also the Greta trilogy, don't mesh. They are very different types of stories, and they bend the world in very different ways that I personally don't think are compatible. Like, I think it's nice when people enjoy that, but again, I'm a crossover hater. I like when established rules for characters, like, are consistent. And that usually doesn't happen in crossovers because, again, protagonists usually warp the world in a way that doesn't make sense when they're not the protagonist anymore, which then leads to moments where they get way too much attention from a narrative that shouldn't be about them because they're in the wrong story.
Yeah. For the example of what you said with Shadow and Bone, I feel like it works to have the crows in a different story, because there are kind of like this they are this kind of group that just does things for money and for like kind of, you know, like the right motivation, so to speak. But it doesn't work to put Elena and the crows together, because Elena does have this main super important character. Everything warps around.
The Grisha trilogy is about a chosen one who has a very clear and thematic connection to her specific villain, and the world just revolves around them. And like, when you start putting them in like a different story, it doesn't work anymore. You can't.
I do enjoy the Shadow and Bone series. I'm very excited for the second season, which is going to come out in a couple of weeks. But I do agree that there need to be some changes made. I mean, we'll see how the second season goes.
I know that like the show is like purposefully making changes to actively integrate them, which is very different from like what often happens in like book crossovers and stuff. Because for this one, both stories are already finished and they already know what they can work with, and they have decided to fundamentally change both of them to make something new that works, which I think is basically the only way you could make this work, because you couldn't just have the crows also appear in the already established plot of the Grisha trilogy. That would be deranged. They would not fit in. They're the wrong kind of characters for the story. So,
and like it's similar to like The Cruel Prince. You have this completely finished story with Lord Räuben, and now he gets dragged back out of the rafters. It's like, here, you know, have your
here,
little
look at this
moment.
guy. You remember this guy? I wrote about him in the early 2010s. Look at him. And it's like,
he's my baby.
It's like, I know, he's my special boy too. He sucks. I love him. But why is he getting so much attention? This isn't about him.
It's totally different to the Stolen Heir, like the new book that came out, because there it's like a continuation of the trilogy of The Cruel Prince, whereas the Räuben thing is just completely like out of the blue. One other thing, because I'm a bit tired talking about this side character. The one thing, because you mentioned it previously with like the Cardan romance subplot, was that I feel like a lot of potential for Cardan gets wasted in the first book. I think he really like shines as a character in the second book, and I mean, he is the title of the book. He is the Cruel Prince, and in the second book, he is the Wicked King. So it feels like we should.
Wicked, honestly.
I mean, yeah, but we should see more of. I feel we should see more of Cardan, and a lot of the a lot of the time that we spend on other characters and other situations should have been spent on him doing something else than picking on Jude for the upteenth time.
Yeah,
like I get it. I have seen it. I have seen him do things, and for the most part of the book, all we see him do is lounge around somewhere, look at Jude, and then give her like a sassy one-liner and walk away.
Yeah, I also think that like, sure, he's plenty cruel, but there's very little princely activity going on. Like, I get it. His whole backstory is that he was, like, thrown out of the palace because of a prophecy or whatever, and nobody loves him. Boo-hoo. But, he's...
Boo-hoo?
Yeah, very, very sad clown music plays.
The smallest violin.
Yeah, but really, though, I guess it feels like he's a little too juvenile for the story he's in. Like, the pranks they play on Jude and Taryn, the whole bullying is very middle school. Like, they throw their stuff in the river, they push them into the water, whatever. They throw dirt on their food. These are children's pranks. If they are, like, I would expect more from people who actually hold some political sway and are somewhat considered important. I feel like there should be different tension that isn't, oh, Jude knows better than us what the answer for this lesson should be. Yeah, so we're mad and we're gonna throw her books into the river. No, there should be more courtly intrigue, I guess. Like, they should make her life hard, but not in, like, these juvenile ways where they have to get their own hands dirty.
The one scene that I like genuinely liked in terms of how it was set up and how it kind of knocked Jude off her high horse, because it's after she starts becoming a spy and she's like, you know, growing a little bit of an ego, is the part where they make her eat fairy fruit.
Yeah.
And she, like, they like, she starts to undress, she starts to behave, like, completely weirdly. And that was one of the scenes where I was like, that's the cruel prince. That's the kind of shit
stuff I'd expect of fairies.
Yeah.
Like, not like pranks, like, not the kind of bullying you'd also get from normal kids.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's what I wanted to see, basically. And the thing is, I think we talked about this in the very beginning, or I said it for a short moment, is this thing about fairies not lying. We have Madoc with his very direct approach, and we have Cardan, who is very good at saying things and, like, turning it around and just like, we have scenes where Jude analyzes like whole sentences that Cardan says, because she's like, all of this was true, but it's a perfect lie. And that's wasted potential. I wanted to see more of that. I wanted to see more of his like sassy scheminess, because he is immature and he's very vain and, like, you know, a seventh child. But there could have been more.
I also feel like there could have been more. It feels odd to have, like, this schoolyard bullying next to her performing spy work for the next king.
Mm-hmm.
These are very different genres of book meshed into one. And I don't know if they... I feel like there should have really been different stakes for the kind of shit Cardan pulls towards Jude than, oh, you're wet and your stuff gets destroyed, which sucks, obviously, but it's not particularly inventive or, like, I guess this sounds shitty, but it's not, like, a cool sort of thing to do. Like, it's not it's not interesting.
It feels like these kind of immature pranks are something that they would have done when Jude and Taryn were still very young, because then, like, the other fairy children would have been younger, and it's been like this juvenile way of fighting. But as they get older, their kind of, like, desire to be mean and to hurt and to, like, do violent stuff would grow as well. So you would expect them to get tired of the little stuff that they do to Jude and Taryn, and to get more, like, interested into actually fucking them up.
I also would have expected more, like, curses or enchantments or word games, and not this. I feel like the things that happen in the book could be things that could be, like, mentioned in, like, retrospectives from Jude. That she's like, oh, and this happened. Like, at a thematically appropriate moment, like, mention them, but they don't seem necessary for this book. What and also reminds me of, like, the juvenile shit is the weird, like, it's not even a love triangle, it's, like, a fucking just confused mess where it's like, oh, Cardan and Nicasia were in love, but then Locke seduced Nicasia, so she's not with Carden anymore. But then Locke also seduced Taryn, and then he told Taryn to prove her love while he's making out with Jude. But actually Carden has always had kind of a crush on Jude, like a hate boner, and it's like, do we need... Why is it like this? Did we need this?
A hate boner. Yeah, I also thought that was kind of convoluted, especially since the whole thing between Carden and Nicasia is also like a political alliance thing, where they're like, oh, we're gonna match the child from the Sealy court to the child from the Greenbrier line.
Yeah, it's just, the weird part is that none of this was necessary. Like, Locke seducing Taryn and then trying to romance Jude to make Carden mad didn't need the added layer of, oh, also he had a thing with Nicasia after he stole her from Carden. Like, Carden and Nicasia can just be friends, and Carden already dislikes Jude and Taryn.
Yeah.
He doesn't need the added motivator, and Nicasia already dislikes them too, because they're beneath her and shouldn't be with them in their lessons. And Valerian is kind of there. Lucky him. Nobody trying to seduce him, I guess. But
he's just kind of existing.
Because I think this part is kind of annoying, because I wish we'd had more time with Taryn. So the whole subplot of her falling in love with Locke and then, like, keeping it a secret from Jude, this could have been more effective if this weird shit wasn't in the background, and you'd be like, what? Why are all of them connected?
It feels very, like, high school plot.
Yeah.
The whole going to the lessons, the whole love story with Locke, the bullying, it feels like there is a dissonance between that and the expertly laid out fight between Jude and Madoc. It's like you've got this beautiful intrigue, lots of emotions, like we don't know what to feel. Do we like Madoc? Do we hate him?
And then you've got he's my terrible green son.
And then next to it we have like, oh, I'm gonna steal your lunch money.
Yeah. The weird thing is, like, sure, these are young adult books. They are for young adults. But that doesn't mean they have to imitate high school, especially because the second and third book don't have that part at all anymore, because it's not relevant to the political intrigue. Like, I feel like Holly Black first conceptualized, like, the basic idea and had, like, this image of them going to fairy school together and, like, how they're connected through their families and stuff, and then just kept this at the beginning, and, like, we didn't need that much of it. It would have been enough to have, like, 1-2 chapters to figure out, okay, this was Jude's baseline before she got involved in the politics. We didn't need, like, a whole third or, like, half of the book with this happening.
I mean, especially because there is a chapter, I think it's, if I count correctly, it's chapter 6 or chapter 7, where Jude is like, okay, well, I should have started the story differently, and then she counts down 4 situations that show how weirdly dangerous and hostile the fairylands are. Like, she got parts of her finger bitten off. Against her will, she was made to dance at one of the revels, and in the end, she was like handed back to Oriana and Madoc, like, you know, just some rat they found somewhere, and we're like, by the way, we found this on the floor crying. She describes how she gets glamored by Oak, and he enjoys her having to repeatedly slap herself. Like, we already have a chapter like this with the flashbacks and with the setting of a tone. Why not use that, like you said, with flashbacks for the school? To establish that baseline.
The thing is that other points in the book, we also get other flashbacks, or like her recounting things from their youth again, which are very effective, and like which makes you wonder why we have those moments that we really do not need.
Yeah, definitely.
So
it's that's one of the part that when I read this book for the first time, I read it quite quickly. I read it, I inhaled it. And this time, I mean, I was like not in the biggest reading mood in general for the past couple of weeks, so that might have also played into it. And because I wanted to annotate the book, but in general, annotating books is like fun for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yes, and I'm marking everything, and I'm having a grand time.
Yeah.
It doesn't really slow me down that much, but I did struggle reading this book, like for the second time now. And I wonder why that is, because the first time it went down perfectly, but the second time, maybe because I knew what was going on, maybe I knew, like, where the fun parts are, and all the other parts were like, ugh, you're going to the lesson again. I don't know what about it, but I talked about this to another friend of mine, because she bought these books, like, I think a year ago or something, and she only now has finished The Cruel Prince, and then she annihilated The Wicked King in like a day. And she was like, why is this book so difficult to read? And I think this whole tonal thing, like flip-flop, is definitely one of the reasons why it's so hard to read at some point. And that's one of the things where I can understand people saying, why is the Folk of the Air series so popular if The Cruel Prince is at points such a weird, like,
I mean, I think it's like
pacing.
I think it's funny, like, every time people say this, because on the one hand, The Cruel Prince is, quite frankly, a lot better than a good chunk of other very popular books. I'm not gonna stand here and be like, oh, it's a masterpiece. It's a 10 out of 10 every time. I'm like, it's a solid maybe 3.5 to 4 out of 5, depending on how generous I'm feeling. But, like, I think it's, like, very obvious that the compelling part is the character work, which Holly Black is very good at. Even if the plot is, like, kind of a little forced at times, it's, like, the character work is really compelling, especially the familial relationships, which a lot of other YA just drops and just doesn't really address
They
much.
go straight into the romance.
Yeah. And, like, that's the compelling part. Like, that's why we spent, like, I don't know, 20 minutes talking about how interesting Madoc is. Because, quite frankly, the interplay between his goals and his behavior and Jude's goals and Jude's behavior is what drives these books. Like, Carden is there. He's like a boy toy. Cool. Cool. Have a nice, like, little boy toy on the side, Jude. You deserve it. Whatever. But he's not that important to the story.
Yeah.
He's the love interest. He's just kind of there. And sometimes does funny shit. Okay. But really, the interesting and, like, driving factors are Madoc and Jude. Like, in the first book, especially near the end, where it's, like, Madoc's plans she's trying to foil. In the second book, especially in the third book.
The third book is,
Yeah, so that's the really important part. And also, like, it's a lot more emotionally, like, interesting to see Taryn's betrayal of Jude and to see how that impacts their relationship through the next books, and to see, like, her strained relationship to everyone else in her family while she's trying to hold on to power because that means safety. It is really interesting, and how, like, you hurt people in your family who you care about if you are in a traumatic situation, if you are trying to help yourself, and there's not really anything you can do about it because the situation just sucks. And those are the interesting things. Like, the romance with Carden is like, he's hot and, like, whatever. I don't think he's cool. He's a loser boy. He sucks so much, which is why I like him. But people who are thirsty for Carden, I feel like, lack reading comprehension. He sucks so bad. Like, he has substance abuse problems. He's just, like, a silly little guy. He's bad at most things. He just knows how to be charismatic in front of a crowd. He's pathetically, like, in love-hate with a woman he thinks will never like him back. He's a pathetic little loser boy, which is why I love him, but he is not cool. Like,
I totally agree. For one point with like Jude wanting to keep power and like her whole relationship with Taryn, in the beginning she wants to get that power to protect Taryn. That's like literally a quote. Let me find it. It's when she like wants to be part of the tournament and have one of them, the prince or princesses, grant her knighthood. She says it would be a kind of power, a kind of protection, and with it I could protect Taryn too. That's like the starting point of this book. And by the end, after she finds out about the whole Locke thing and everything, she throws Taryn a sword, and she asks for a duel. She fucking fights her sister.
Yeah, it's
for her honor in the house, and that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the books, because there's something that inherently breaks between these two, and it's so interesting.
It is, because ultimately it's like, because in the beginning parts, Jude is like, I want this power so I can also protect Taryn with it, but unbeknownst to her, Taryn has already decided that she has found a way to safety, and she's willing to throw Jude under the bus to get it.
Yeah.
And it's like so interesting.
There's this thing where Taryn says, I think it's during the duel or sometimes afterwards, where Taryn says, you hate me because I'm a mirror that you're looking into. And it's like, yeah, they're opposites,
they're twins,
but Jude sees the same amount of ruthlessness and the same amount of I'm willing to throw people under the bus that she has herself in Taryn, and it infuriates her, because out of Jude's perspective, if she does it, it's okay, but if somebody else does it, if Taryn does it, it's not okay. Jude has a huge problem with like giving, like, she's a micromanager. She has a huge problem with giving away power, because she has to fight for every single smidge of power so much that she's like, now that I have it, nobody like take anything from it.
Yeah.
So that's so good.
There's also, like, earlier in the book, the moment where Taryn says that sometimes I hate you because you are there all the time when bad things happen to me, and if you weren't there, then I could just pretend it didn't happen. And that's also so interesting, because, like, it's true, and, like, Jude's like, well, that's kind of unfair, and Taryn's like, I know, but that doesn't change the fact that it feels like this for me.
Yeah.
And it's, like, so interesting, because it's the same thing where it's like, sure, they care for each other, but that doesn't mean they are safe from each other hurting each other. Like, it's so interesting. It's like...
And, yeah...
You cannot be safe in Madoc's house, not from him, but also not from anybody else, because Oak has also hurt Jude, even though he likes her, and he thought it was fun, but he still hurt her. And Oriana has also hurt Jude with things she said, and the way she treats Jude as, like, a danger to Oak, even though it's not personal. She treats everyone as, like, a potential danger to Oak, because he's just so important, but also fragile to her personally. So it's like...
But it's so good, because also that quote that you mentioned with Taryn being like, you know, I can't forget that these things are horrible because you are here as a reminder. In the end, we find out that all of these things happen because Taryn's like challenge of love is to endure, like, having all of this blame put on Jude. So it's not just that Jude is infuriating for the fairies. They're literally saying, if you want to be one of us, you've got to endure the fact that we're going to, like, bully your sister and make her life miserable. So that's even, like, an added layer, because it's not just the fact that, oh, she can't pretend that none of this is happening. It's literally her fault that these things are happening.
They started,
and she can't turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, the bullying, like, escalated because she was together with Locke, and he was like, and the whole, like, romance mess. And, like, sure, Jude then fought back, but, like, Taryn could have stopped it. Like, she could have
at any point.
Yeah, because, like, obviously Jude fought back when she was like, they just randomly became even shittier, and I'm unwilling to bear this anymore. This is too much. And, like, it's... And then Taryn also, like, low-key blames her for fighting back. Like, if you just, like, stop, they would forget about it and stop doing it. And it's like, Taryn, this is your fault.
That's like just a bland out lie. And like Taryn is like, if you stop fighting back, they're not gonna be as agitated. But the fact that they're doing it to this kind of degree is Taryn's fault, because Taryn wants that fairy wedding, that fairy relationship, and
she wants to be a consort because that's her idea of safety at court, to be somebody else's like charge, so then she doesn't have to worry about it anymore, and everyone's like, oh, she's this guy's, so we can't be mean to her in public because that'll be bad.
That concept also gets like beautifully like unraveled during the coronation, because all of the consorts who are connected to some sort of royalty get killed as well. So
yeah, I mean, it already got unraveled in the beginning, because Jude's mother didn't just run away because, like, she fell in love with some guy. It's also because Madoc is the way he is. Because just because you're married to a fairy doesn't mean that they will not hurt you or your children. Because I think she mostly also decided to run away because she had Vivi and she didn't want Vivi to be like Madoc. So she was like, yikes, gonna leave. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like this. There's a fault in both of Jude and Taryn's plan. There's a fault in Jude's plan because she simply cannot become a knight, because she can't compete. And there's a fault in Taryn's plan because she won't be safe no matter where she goes. And this topic also gets like touched on with Oriana and her whole spiel about consorts are never safe, and that her whole marriage to Madoc isn't one of love in the least, and that she's very aware that he can just strangle her at any point, which is why she's so protective of Oak. So there's so many interesting concepts here, and they just constantly get interrupted by stuff that makes me go, ugh. Like, why?
It is. I think the thing is, this book suffers like a lot of YA, in my opinion, from not being allowed breathing room. It is too fast-paced to really explore the interesting parts of it. Like, obviously, it's the first book in a series, so there's, like, more time to explore some of it later, which does get explored, which is interesting. But there's also just so much that we can all only just kind of, like, wave at while moving by at, like, high speeds and just be like, hey, cool concept. Sad we'll never see you again, but, you know, it was nice knowing you.
The thing is, like, fast books or fast-paced stories like this are a lot of fun. Yeah. I genuinely enjoy them in lots of books. The same as I enjoy very slow stories, if it's done right. But with with the very good writing of Holly Black, of information-dense stuff, it just really turns into a problem at some point. Which is sad.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not even to say that it needs to just be longer, but the same amount of things happen. There could be more things happening. It just needs to be that we need more scenes for all of the subplots than we are getting right now.
Yeah.
Because it's not that we need less scenes where stuff happens. There can be, like, more action and, like, more antagonistic interactions or whatever, but we need more build-up for each of the threads that weave the story, and we're just not really getting it because that's just how it is. Like, I mean, the thing is, but really though, it's like, you know how it is. That's... And, like, I understand why she didn't, like, end the book at, like, the failed coronation turned execution, Because the real turning point that we want before the second book is Cardan being crowned.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's important, because that's actually where the story is going. The story's not going, oh no, who will be the next fairy monarch? It's like, oh no, the guy who already sucked is now in an even greater position of power. What are we gonna do about this?
With the delicious addition of the reader and a very few select amount of people knowing like that Jude is tied to like his doing.
Yeah,
so
and
basically
like,
she is kind of,
he's on the throne and you're holding his leash, but your leash is gonna disintegrate in a year and you have no contingency plans so
in
far.
a year and a day and not a minute more.
Yeah, and it's like he is the most powerful person in the immediate vicinity now, and for now, he's muzzled, but not for very long. And he already disliked you before, and then you betrayed him by putting him in this position. You have dug your own grave. And like, that's really interesting.
The naivete of Jude saying, oh well, I need Cardan to like be on the throne for 10 years. At least 7 years. I'm gonna be able to convince him. And then you have that scene of betrayal, and you like, she sees Cardan and she's like, oh fuck, I messed up.
It's not great.
Maybe a year is enough. I don't know.
Yeah,
that's the fun setup for book 2.
And like, I think there's also the dynamic between like Jude and Cardan as like narrative foils is very interesting. And I think it's much more interesting than like their romance or whatever, because
definitely,
like, even though he doesn't really have a lot of power and he doesn't have that much safety either, his goal is to leave it all behind, to escape the power struggle altogether and just not deal with it anymore, while her drive is in the opposite direction, to gain more and more power.
Yeah.
And that's also what makes the last scene of the first book it's almost like a thesis statement where he like gestures for her to sit on the throne, and it's like, well, this is what you wanted, right? Go sit on it.
Go, like, these are the consequences of your actions.
Yeah, and it really is just like, well, enjoy it while it lasts. See how much safety this kind of power actually brings you. And it's also like, perfect. It's also just like basically the quintessential feel that you get from fairy bargains, because like, you wanted power, but the payoff now is that you only have this power for a very short time, and the moment that time runs out, you were absolutely fucked. And it's so good.
It's like, in the whole book, we have different kind of enchantment in guises being put on Jude and then also on other people, and this is like the ultimate, as you said, it's like the ultimate fairy enchantment. It's something that has been set up previously in the book, where in the beginning she's like, I can never let anybody put a geese on me. I can never have like involvement in this kind of magic because I can't control it. To where in the end of the book where she's like, this is my only chance for all of my plans to actually kind of maybe work. So let's do it. And then she's stuck, or like, not stuck. She's in the situation.
It's also like interesting for Jude through the entire book to repeatedly pick up the notion of, sure, I am gaining power, but I have given something away, but I don't know what it is, and I don't think I can ever get it back, but I also don't know if I want it back, because if I had it back and was again the defenseless Jude that was sitting in front of a television at 7 years old, I would be again at the mercy of somebody much stronger than me who could simply kill me. And it's like, this is such a... Like, on the one hand, it's a good theme for, like, a fairy story, because, again, like, you're bargaining things away to receive something that you might not even actually enjoy when you actually have it in your hands. but it's also such a perfect encapsulation of what childhood trauma does to somebody. Because,
like a recklessness.
But also, like, there's, she mentions this, like, several times, I think, as well, that Madoc keeps his red cap in his study, and it's red because he keeps dipping it in the blood of people he's killed. And she went to the study as a child to stare at it and trying to feel. And, like, this kind of emotional numbness and, like, dissociation is also an obvious trauma response. Like, she's continually under stress. But it's so fascinating because from the beginning, she's like, I lost something. And there's something wrong with me and I can never go back. Like, this idea that, like, you lost your home as a child and you can never go back. And then her trust with Taryn breaks and she can never go back. And the thing then she fights with Madoc, and that also means she can never go back. Even if she goes back to the house and somebody somehow makes peace with him, it can never be what it was before. Like, it's so interesting.
There's a lot of scenes where she doesn't really know what she's promising or what she's giving to the other person.
Yeah.
I mean, with Royben, he's literally saying, well, I got a favor, I'm gonna ask, at some point. And she's like, oh, okay.
It's like,
why not?
Yeah, she's like, you want me to agree to something where I don't even know what the outcome will be? And he's like, yeah, that's the same thing you're asking of me.
Yeah, and it's the same thing she's been doing this whole book.
Yeah. She's been bargaining away for power and, like, hoping that at the end her position will be safe enough to make it worth it. But
so these are super interesting concepts that I really, really like about this book. And I think it's so sad that for a very long time, and I think still even now, people promote The Cruel Prince as like this, oh, it's so similar to ACOTAR, and that's so similar to Throne of Glass.
That's
and then people
character assassination of this book. Oh my god!
And then people flock to The Cruel Prince, thinking they're gonna get the same kind of story.
Yeah,
and that's not it. I think you said it one time very fittingly. You said, The Cruel Prince is a romance book second. And like a political intrigue first, and like a character study first, and it got promoted a lot of time, especially on TikTok and on Bookstagram, as like a reverse of it, because the main attraction of that cosplayers and artists picked up is Jude wears amazing dresses, she has gorgeous hair, and there is this tall, dark-haired dude with a tail, and they're in love.
Yeah,
and I feel like all of these things we just discussed, and then you've got this freaking injustice.
Yeah, I think this is why I could never get into the fandom, because a lot of it is very focused. Like, especially every time I've seen a TikTok promoting this book, it's been about the ship and about like how cool and hot Carden is or whatever, and it's just like, this is not at all what I got from the books.
Yeah.
Like,
definitely not.
Like, on the one hand this, but on the other hand also, because you've mentioned it, like, artists, almost none of the fan art that I've seen of The Cruel Prince actually feels like it's for the book. Because a lot of it is just like Carden and Jude looking like adults. And I think that misses an incredibly important part of the book, which is that they are both children, they are teenagers, stuck in a system in which neither of them has a lot of control, and they're both trying to exert their control in some ways. But it's very important that they're feral children who are fucked up. Like, they're not 25-year-old models who just look hot while doing cool shit. No, they are struggling for, like, their life. Especially Jude. It's like, they're feral children. Every time I see a picture of, like, Jude being, looking like a 25-year-old airbrushed model, I don't understand how you... Because if this is your impression of Jude, this book reads differently. Because if she were an adult who was in control of her life, this would be entirely different. But she's a child at the mercy of people stronger than her, both at school, from her peers, but most importantly, from the people who are in her in the parental roles for her. Like, her father is basically the biggest threat to her, but she cannot leave because she lives there, and if she left, she'd be in even more danger.
And we have these... I totally agree, and we have these very, like, both for Cardan and for Jude, these very not juvenile characters, these very adult characters. We have Madoc, we have Dane, we have Baelkin, who's the firstborn, and he's like kind of an adult version of Cardan and everything horrible that Cardan could grow up to be.
Yeah.
And we have these very adult, like, antagonists to these teenage characters, so it feels even more like it feels almost like a lack in, like, media literacy. if you read these books, and what you go away with is that kind of image you have of both Jude and Cardan.
Two hot people having, like, hate boners for each other, if that's what you take away. Because, like, I mean, they literally go to school at the beginning.
Yeah.
They're literally school children whose parents or, like, whose guardians are like, well, have you been getting better? Are you doing well at school? Like, Cardan gets punished for not doing well at, like, his studies by Baelkin, who he lives with, who took him in when he was a child and was kicked out of the palace. Like, Madoc tutors Jude in, like, stuff
she gets homework
about.
from him.
She has to have dinner with him and Oriana because they're a family. Like, these are so obviously not adults, and I feel like depicting them as if they were just, like, adults does a disservice to, like, the horror that it is to be a young dependent on other people, and you cannot leave the abusive situation you're in. Like, I feel like it misses the point of what the story is trying to say about domestic abuse in parts. Like,
definitely. And it's kind of, if you read it like that, it takes away so much of the relationship between Madoc and Jude. Because there's not just antagonism and, like, a power imbalance between them, because he's the kidnapper, he's, like, the evil stepfather, and there's, like, a Stockholm syndrome situation going on. It's literally because he is a parental figure for her as well.
Yeah.
And of course you can, like, there are amazing stories about families with children that are in their 20s, 30s, and you have, like, those kind of parent dynamics, but that's not the case here. It's not the case, and it's very, like, on purpose that this is not the case.
A huge thing of these, like, both of these characters, Cardan and Jude, are trying to find a way to reliably run away from home. Cardan's way is to get Baelkin on the throne so he can just leave and be promised that he'll be left alone and he'll never have to think about any of it again. And Jude's way is, if I don't want Madoc to be a constant threat, I need to be a knight for somebody else who is more important than Madoc so that they then can shield me from my home. Like, to read this and then draw them like adults just is, I don't know. Sometimes I also wonder if it's just because a lot of book fan artists just have one standard face and body type they draw, and then they customize it just to the, like, vague descriptors of the characters, and are like, yeah, they just all look like my standard adult face, whatever, it's fine.
I think there's also, like, I think that definitely plays into it, especially with the whole, like, a lot of book talk artists, or, like, book fandom artists having a similar style that is in some way like a version of Charlie Bowater, and then it kind of other artists kind of took parts of that style and made it a little bit their own, and then they got copied again, so it's like
that's true.
A chain of that. But I think it's also, it makes it easier to get into this fantasy of this weird, like, of a romance that is far more like tame in the book if you age up the characters in your mind, or, like, visually age them up. It's a lot less weird to draw them
in these sometimes like quite scandalous pictures than if you were to draw them looking like what they actually look like, which is, you know, late teenagers.
Yeah. I don't know. It feels like the fandom. I mean, I don't know. I'm not in the fandom. I'm sure there are like parts of the fandom that are very interested in the actual like themes, and that's what they're focused on. But what you superficially perceive of the fandom is a lot of, oh, Jude and Carden have such a cool romance, and isn't it spicy and fun, and like, wow, let's imagine what their children might look like. And it's just like, they're fucking 17.
Yes.
Fucking children. Oh my god.
And it gets even weirder if you think about, it's mentioned several times in the book that the fairies, for one part, like, endure humans in fairyland because they need them to procreate.
Yeah.
And if you then think about, oh, let's see what kind of, like, it gives me the ick to think about people going, oh, you know, let's see what their children are like. It's like, Jude never talks about it, but I feel like that's already an indicator enough.
I feel like
she's a teenager. She's not thinking about it because she's a teenager.
Jude is entirely unsuited to raising children, which I think she's also probably fairly aware of. If she thought about it, she'd be like, yeah, I'm too much like Madoc to be a parent. But also, these are teenagers. They don't need to think about having children. By God, they have more than enough shit happening already. The last thing they need is a fucking child.
I haven't finished The Stolen Heir yet, so I can't say for certain. But I swear, if Holly Black comes at us with a pregnancy trope in either The Stolen Heir or the next book, I'm gonna throw something.
I mean, honestly,
it might be the first time I'm gonna write an angry Instagram comment.
This is why I don't read sequels. Can't be blindsided by a random pregnancy for a former main character if you don't read it. Ha! Once again, I stay winning.
The thing is, I have no problem with this kind of like characters getting children and like the story moving on. If it's something like, if there's like half a generation or a whole generation between it. You know what I mean? It's like characters having a child, and then those characters are already like in their 40s or 50s, and the child is not a teenager anymore, and they have their own little story, and the main characters are just the parents in quotation marks, or even the grandparents or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. But if it's like centered around them being parents, it could be interesting for Jude because she has such a fucked up, traumatized family life, but it's not something that I feel fits Jude.
I mean, didn't we already get a pregnancy for Taryn in the second book?
We do get.
Sorry,
I didn't want to mention it.
Yeah,
but
sorry.
She does
Spoiler.
get pregnant with Locke. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was also jarring for me when I first read it.
This was very at the same random. I was like, did we need this?
It's like a child. No.
I mean, honestly, the whole, like, everything that happens in the third book is kind of whack. So it's like par for the course, I suppose. But like that's also what I mean with like the writing, like especially like the plot going downhill for the later books. Is like the first one is like very, very intensely plotted and paced. Like it's clear that the most thought went into this book because the other two books are much worse in this regard, I would say. I mean, my favorite from the other two books are also the kind of Madoc and Jude moments we get. Definitely. Because again, I don't care that much about Carden or the romance. There are also like some Carden moments, but they're more about like his character growth than any romance.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Geht's dir los?
Ja.
I got it.
Dankeschön. Bis dann. Ja. Viel Spaß euch. Tschüss.
Tschüss.
gotta edit that out in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Especially because in the second book, it's like the cards are on the table, and Madoc knows that Jude,
Yeah, he knows
Jude
about the
does
bargain,
have the
yeah.
thing. He says, "Oh, you don't have the thing. It has nothing to do with experience." And she shows him, "I actually can do what you didn't think I was able to do." And then he gets like very excited for this whole thing.
He is
In the second and third book, he's like a puppy that just got a new toy.
Because on the one hand, he is so angry at her for ruining his plans, but he's also so proud because he has spent a decade teaching her strategy, and he's like, "You've done so well. You've outmaneuvered me. I'm impressed, but also please stop and come back now so that I can get what I want." But like that's why he's so interesting to me, because like he doesn't, like, it's not the like standard abusive parent situation where it's like, oh, they don't actually love their child very much, like they're just kind of a shitty parent. No, like he cares, and he's also proud of her, and like he wants her to be successful, but he wants his own success more. And like he's like, "I wish you would come back and hand these successes to me. And like, because even though I'm proud of you, these are things that I feel I deserve, that I am entitled to, because I've spent centuries doing this kind of work, which is why I deserve it more." But like, that's so interesting, because there's also, I guess, another spoiler warning for the third book. There's later a part where he actually like stabs her, and it's pretty bad. And like, he immediately feels bad about it. It's the same as what happened with her mother. It's basically, he is enraged because Jude runs away from him, and he tells her not to run. It's the same, which makes sense. He tells her not to run, and then and she's like bleeding pretty hard, and immediately he's like, "Let me take you to a healer." And it's like insane. Like, he sucks so much, but it's not. But he is trying, but also he cannot change. He is like this. It is just the way he is.
It makes for such an interesting, like, it just makes for such an interesting character. And we've been saying this over and over and over, but it is true. And in all honesty, I feel like if you pitched this book in that kind of way, a lot of more people who, like, I felt like a lot of people were quite disappointed when they read The Cruel Prince, which I understand.
Yeah,
but
if you're
you
for
would
the
get
romance,
you would get a totally different demographic coming in reading The Cruel Prince, because I know that, like, from my own experience, a lot of times, especially as a teenager, I didn't like these kind of romance-heavy books.
Yeah.
I just started reading romance-heavy books when I turned, like, 20, 21. Before that, everything that had a lot of romance just, like, got thrown out of the window because I didn't like that. It wasn't interesting to me, in a way, also because of some, like, internalized misogyny, because it was like, why would I want to read about romance, but like, a lot of people who shy away from these kind of stories would, I bet with you, would really enjoy The Cruel Prince.
Yeah, I
There's
agree.
like something super random that I like about this book, but the way Holly Black describes food, I got hungry every single time they unpacked their lunch at school.
I love those moments where I'm like, oh, this sounds so tasty, and then I'm like, wait, I hate this food. Like, there was a part where she described, like, something that had raisins in it, and I'm personally a raisin hater. So at first I was like, oh, this sounds so good. Like, the way it was described, I was like, oh, this sounds tasty. And then I was like, wait, raisins? No, this wouldn't be tasty.
It's just, whenever she was like, oh, they're eating some cheese and, like, the super nice bread, and then they have, like, these plums and the jam, and I was just sitting there like...
It sounds so satisfying. Like, the food sounds so good.
It sounds like the food in Ghibli movies looks.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
that's how it sounds.
Her writing is really good at encapsulating the way, like, a fairy world, like, would make you feel, like, from how the stories describe it, how, like, everything is vibrant and beautiful and the food is, like, sumptuous and looks so tasty, and it's just, all of it is just outstanding and you want it.
Yeah.
And it just works. It
works very well.
It's really good. But yeah, it's the thing that the book gets marketed most by fans, and sometimes also like the companies, is the thing I find least compelling. Like, the romance, like, it's fine. Like, especially in the later books, there are like some nice scenes, I guess. But like, I just don't care that much about it, because compared to other relationships, it's just not that interesting. Especially because I feel like the romance doesn't actually explore how they mirror each other enough. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of it is like fun stuff where it's like, oh, the second book, like, they start building trust and like they're building some sort of relationship, but they don't actually explore how, like, their similarities made them hate each other so much. And like, it's, I don't know, I feel like it could be much more interesting than it ends up being.
For me, the whole romance is, I agree. For me, the whole romance is, it's more interesting if you think about it from Cardan's perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I love reading those kind of scenes with, like, Cardan's point of view in mind. Because it's we know Jude's perspective, and she's like, I don't know, do I like him, do I not like him, I don't know, he's kind of hot. But Cardan is like being tormented by the fact that he loves this human, and she's infuriating, and he thinks he is infuriating, but for some reason, like, it still clicks, and that's more interesting to me than the romance in general.
I also think that, because also it's like, sure, like, Jude sometimes notices how beautiful Cardan is, but but there's also, it's mostly just like, I hate him, and I hate that he's beautiful enough to make me think anything positive of him, even though sometimes I hate him so much I can barely breathe. But, like, from his perspective, but the thing is, because Jude just has a lot on her plate, while Cardan doesn't really, which is why Jude isn't the romance protagonist. If you wanted this to be a romance, it would have to be from Cardan's perspective, which would also suck, because then you'd be in the head of someone who's like, well, I am attracted to her, but also this makes me hurt her because I can't deal with the fact that I want her. Like, and it's like the scene where they make her eat fairy fruit must be so interesting from his perspective. Because you get glimpses of it. Like, the description where, like, when she's stripped and only in her underwear, and he's like, and she notices that, like, he looks like he wants her, but he also looks ashamed. And it's, and then, like, it smooths out again. But, like, it's so, like, there's so much interesting stuff happening. There's this really, like, it's so small, but it's one of my favorite interactions with them. Thinking about how, like, suave Cardan is most of the time, and then when they go to Baelkin's estate, to Hollow Hall, for the coronation dinner party thing, and he's like, have I told you how hideous you look tonight? And she's like, no, tell me. And instead of coming up with something, like, super smart, he's just like, I cannot, he says, then frowns. And it's like, it's so cute. And like, also, because we find out in a later arc, I think, that the dress she wears to the actual coronation was from him. And it's like, he's so pathetic. He's such a pathetic loser boy. I love that for him.
He's so, like the first thing that comes to my mind when thinking about Cardan is, like, cute disaster, not hot mess, like hot sexy mess. You know what I mean?
I'm just like, he's my pathetic loser boy. He has a tail. He's such a little baby. He has a tail that
twitches when he's nervous.
Yeah,
Fucking
he's
cute.
like I cannot understand people, especially like, okay, after the third book he has like more dignity, I guess, generally, and he's like more of a realized person and less pathetic, but even after
And that
only the
happens to you
first
if you
book
become a
was
snake.
out, people were thirsty and they were like, he's so cool and sexy, and it's like, it's all pretend. Like, we know, like, we have seen him vulnerable after his family got murdered and Jude abducted him. He's just a pathetic little boy who's good at pretending like he's untouchable because it's the only thing he can do. Like,
He's literally begging. He's begging his life for his life. And it's
He's-
like...
he's literally just like, you know what? I'll do whatever you want if only I can leave. He's not cool. He's like...
And it's not one of those tropes that is unknown. You have this trope so many times in different kinds of media where you have this suave person who is
Yeah.
supposed to be in power, and then like the shell crumbles away and they're like pathetic, and it's like, that's exactly
Yeah,
what
but
it
also
is.
the thing about Carton is like, he's kind of pathetic from the beginning. Like, he's trying to act cool, but also like, he picks on people at school. Like, everyone knows he's the least favorite prince and nobody cares about him. It's embarrassing. Jude is much better at like all their subjects than him. She easily beats him in combat. He's so embarrassed every time she is better than him.
The tournament is like, I feel like it's not, the focus is not on it because Jude doesn't focus on that part because she's too angry at not being like allowed to be a knight. But she literally, once she puts her back into it, she easily beats Carden.
Yeah.
She runs him over, she elbows him in the face, but it's at that point she doesn't focus on that because she's like, okay, I think Carden's gonna like kick me in the face once I go out of the arena. He just looks at her like pissed off, and then Valerian goes over and like tries to bully her. But like he isn't even, he's not even a threat to her in the slightest in that aspect.
Yeah. And
Only by becoming like only by using like his fairy powers, he's actually a threat to Jude.
yeah, and I feel like of course, the thing is that also like, the reader doesn't find him threatening because Madoc is there. Like, I don't know this, how people are like, oh, he's so cool and dangerous, and like, he's not that much. Like, sure, he bullies them, which sucks for them, and is very like hateable, but it's also pathetic. If he really had power, he wouldn't need to do this. Like, Dane doesn't go around bullying people, throwing dirt at their food. He doesn't give a shit.
3 spies for that.
Yeah. That's true. He has these 3 guys for this. Like, Madoc doesn't do it.
Yeah.
None of the other princes or princesses lower themselves to doing this. He has to personally bully Jude. Not like, he doesn't even send like other minions and watches. Most of the time he does it himself. It's so embarrassing for him.
Yeah, but even like, he doesn't even have control over his gang of bullies.
Yeah.
Nicasia does a lot of bullying without like approving it with Carden, and that is a huge thing where she's like embarrassing herself because Carden is like, why did you do that? He doesn't have control of a Valerian. He doesn't have control of a Locke, who just goes and messes with Jude and Taryn. So it's like, he doesn't even have power over these people.
Yeah.
Like,
he just wants to look like it, but he's just a pathetic little loser boy. And I love him. He's like a little pathetic wet kitten that I want to take inside. And but he's not cool and sexy. I don't know where people get this. I really don't.
That's why I feel like the biggest skill he has is the way that he, like, has a way with words.
Yeah.
And we don't see it enough.
He has great charisma. He's good at pretending. Like, that's also the fun juxtaposition between him and Jude. He sucks at most things, but he's good at being, like, charming and pretending, and Jude sucks at this. Jude is a terrible actor. Except, like, because Jude's standard face is just, I cannot let any emotion show, ever, which is why everybody thinks she, like, knows what she's doing or she's not afraid. But, like, otherwise, she can't act. She can't charm people, but she's competent at most other things. But
to be honest, like, Jude's they don't see what I'm doing face, for me, in my head, because she's a teenager, looks like this typical face that teenagers make when they don't know what the fuck is going on. Like this, like a little bit panicked and too silent. And she's like over there like...
Honestly, I think Jude just has resting bitch face, and everyone's like, oh, she has, like, she knows what's up, she's not afraid, she's, like, she has opinions, and internally she's panicking, like, half the time, and the other half the time she's like, what the fuck is happening?
It's the same face people have when they're in the meeting and they're like, I'm having violent diarrhea right now, I need to go.
Yeah, when somebody's like, I'm gonna fart, but I can't right now, fuck.
And everyone's like, so composed, so composed, so steadfast.
Yeah, and like, oh no, they look kind of unhappy. Did I do something wrong? Surely. Surely they're unhappy with some of us for not doing good work, but it's just like, they're just embarrassed.
Yeah, and she's like, dang it, I should have, like buried that guy a little bit further away from the stables. Now the feral horses might dig him up.
It's just... But yeah, no, there's so many interesting fun things, and people just mostly talk about the romance, which is very... It's not even, especially, like, you can say, like, oh, there's an enemies to lovers romance for the whole series, but not for the first book. The first book has barely any romance.
Yeah.
Like, because, again, more important things are happening.
So I have the Hotkey Books version of the Cruel Prince. I know there's like some other publishers, but I think Hotkey Books is like the main one. And they have these hotkeys on the back of the book. And the first one is Assassin. The second one, which like, is she an assassin? She does shoot that one messenger.
She does do that.
So okay, fair.
There is an assassination. That's true.
There's lots of assassinations.
She actually, even does
just
one,
not by her.
Yeah.
Then we have Betrayal, which true.
Yeah, that is true.
Definitely true. And then we have Lover. And it's like...
What, I mean, I guess you can count the Locke plot as this, but... I think they have to put this on, like, YA books just because it's, like, par for the course. They're like, oh, it's fantasy YA, there must be a romance. I'm like, sure, there's something like it, but it's not really romance. And the parts of it that are, like, important from the romance subplot are not the romantic parts.
Definitely. I'm seeing we already talked 2 hours and 20 minutes.
But, I mean... I feel like we're mostly done. Yeah. I'm gonna look through my notes if there's anything else that we haven't brought up yet.
So, we did touch the point of rating very shortly. Before I did a reread, I actually gave Cruel Prince like a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads.
Oh,
but I think I now have to go back and bump it down to a 4. Because while I genuinely love the characters and like everything we just talked about, the fact that I struggled so hard to read this a second time and noticed all of the bumps in the book makes me want to give it a star less. I'm so sorry, The Cruel Prince, but 5 out of 4 is still very good.
Yeah, 5 out of 4 is excellent. That's 125%.
Oh, you're so mean. You're so mean. 4 out of 5. Honestly. I'm gonna edit this episode in a way that makes you sound like you're the most horrible duck in this room.
Yeah, I'm the evil duck this episode. No, I'm always the evil duck. I'm always the hater.
For these couple of frames, you're gonna get red eyes or something.
You're gonna put ominous music every time I talk.
Like doo-doo-doo-doo. So, did your rating change for The Cruel Prince, or?
I don't remember what I rated it last time because I deleted my old Goodreads because I wasn't using it anymore.
Yeah, I remember.
But I think the first time I read it, that was like when it came out, so that was in like 2007, 18. Like that was a long time ago, and I think when I read it that time, I was like, oh, this is great. This was a super good book. Probably would have rated it 5 out of 5 at that point. But I've reread it in between again after I think Queen of Nothing came out, and I read the first 2 again before I read the last one. And at this point, I think I'm like at a 3.5 out of 5. Like, it's not like a bad book. And it's like kind of above average, but also like, even though there's parts of it I really, really like, and like a lot of themes I do really like, a lot of it is just not that good. Like the whole package in its totality just isn't that great. But like it's still good, like 3.5 out of 5. It's still a good book, and I would still recommend it if I know that people like the kind of things that the book has. And again, it's still a lot better than other YA I've read that has come out in the last few years. So yeah, I'm 3.5 is my rating.
So you've heard it here, folks. I would also recommend it, definitely. I mean, I have recommended it to that friend of mine. Fun fact, she wrote me, like, it wasn't in the middle of the night, but quite late. She wrote me and asked me if she had a faulty copy of the book because of the one sentence chapter 1. She was like, wait, does your version also only have one sentence in chapter 1?
That's
and
purpose.
I'm like, wait, let me check, but I think that's correct.
I love when authors play with like chapter length. I think it's very impactful if it's done sparingly, because like it is very meaningful to say like this whole chapter is just this, because it is so important that this gets a whole chapter to itself. There's so much contained in the implications of this that it needs a whole chapter.
There's this one, so I haven't... Okay, this is totally going off the boards, but I haven't read the Twilight books, but there is this scene where Edward leaves Bella, and you have like these chapters that are just empty, like...
Yeah, in the
like
second book.
Like
I think
months.
that's extremely effective as well.
And that's so fucking effective.
It's such a good stylistic choice to portray like depression and stuff. It's so good. It really is just like... Because after that, she also says, like, yeah, everyone was surprised when I started talking to them again because they were so used to me, like, not interacting with anyone.
Yeah.
Because, that's a pretty good choice. But yeah.
But, yeah, I guess, it's getting late. It's getting cozy.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time talking. Like, probably half of this is just, like, discussions of how cool and epic Madoc is, because he's our favorite.
I was about to say this, yeah. Like, this is a Madoc fan club over here.
Yeah.
There's rarely a character that compares, and I honestly don't think I have, in any kind of story, met another character that is like similar to Madoc in his whole entirety and the way that he is connected to our main character.
Yeah.
Because father figure, abusive father figure, like that kind of stuff, of course, that's in other stories as well, but the specific flavor of Madoc.
Yeah, their relationship is so good. It really is the thing that, like, makes these books memorable for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've read other books that also have, like, I don't know, abusive parents, or, like, an enemies to lovers romance, or whatever. But this part is, like, I feel like this is such an interesting and well-explored part of the books that it's just really memorable.
That's a dynamic that's a lot of fun. So if you're into that kind of stuff and you haven't been spoiled enough by us talking about this for 2.5 hours, pick it up.
Yeah, generally, I would recommend it. I think it is fairly good for what comes out of YA fantasy. But also, if you know you are here for the romance, this is probably not for you.
Yeah. And it might not be the best thing to, I think, get started with reading again if you've had a long slump, because of the information dense, like, writing. So maybe like the second book that you pick up.
But yeah.
All right. With that being said, if you have anything else to say,
no.
Talk number one.
I think we've talked through everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you again for listening. It was a fun episode to have, and we do want to talk about the other books, so you're not stuck with just listening to us talk about the first book. We are going to go over the rest of them. And yeah, thank you for listening. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.